Hi, this is Ken Goldie, and I am extraordinarily pleased to welcome you to the very first podcast for the Fast Way. So there just are no words for how excited I am. I'm going to have an amazing guest on for our first episode in just a couple of minutes, the extraordinary Chuck Garcia, author of Climb to the Top and a brand new book about the defining moment that changes your life and how to watch for it and take advantage of it. But since this is the very first podcast for the Fast Way, I thought I'd give you a little background about me. So I have a company called Breakthrough Leadership Training. We do development training for CEOs and executives and personal life training for individuals. And the whole basis of my work is founded in the notion that you can't just change your actions if you want to accomplish something different in life. There's an old saying that if you do the same thing the same way, you can't expect a different result. A lot of people think, well, then I'm just going to change the thing I'm doing. They'll try a different diet, try a different exercise plan, switch to a different job, or find a different place to live, or have a different spouse, or whatever it is. They're just going to change the thing and find that their life doesn't really change, that whatever sense of dissatisfaction or lack of fulfillment or inability to achieve their goals and desires that they were looking for isn't coming along. The notion is you also have to change the way you're doing things. And for a lot of people, that's not really an easy concept to grasp. We think I am who I am and I do things the way I'm doing them. So that must be okay, right? So the FAST way, F-A.S.T, with periods in between, stands for feelings, actions, speech, and thought. And the notion is that everything you think and feel defines who you are on the inside. And everything you say and do is what expresses those thoughts and feelings to others and defines who you are on the outside and how other people engage with you. And that combination of how you think and feel and how your thoughts and feelings drive your words and actions are the things that propel you through life, that make you make choices about the directions you're going to take and the things you're going to do and how you're going to do them. And if you want to actually go down a different path or achieve different results on the path you're on, you have to back up that engine and not just change what you're doing, but change what you think and feel about yourself and others and the world and your role in it. And when you change how you think and feel about all that, when you really change your lens on the world and the internal life that it creates in you, that allows you to create new words and new actions with intent instead of default to the words and actions created by those old default thoughts and feelings, which then create a new way of doing whatever it is that you're doing in life, which can create a new path and new outcomes. So that's the basics of the FAST way, which we're going to be talking about so much in this podcast with Chuck and all the episodes that I plan on doing for you with so many amazing guests. So without further ado, hey, Chuck Garcia, how are you?
I'm very well, Kenny. How are you?
I'm great. I am so very grateful to you, not for so many things that we're going to talk about today, but even more so right now at the moment, because in my venture to expand the reach of, what I'm doing now in the FAST way and the other work that I'm doing, coming up with the idea of branching into a podcast and calling you up and saying, will you be my first guest? And you saying, yeah, how about next week? I'm just so pleased to have you. I couldn't think of a better way to start off sharing wisdom with the world in whatever way that I can through you. So thanks for joining me today.
Well, I'm blessed, Kenny, and I'm touched. And I'm actually also very grateful for the opportunity to lead with you, to be on this mountain, to take your first step. And to the extent that I can help you on this mountain, for me to be the first, that is an honor. But also for you and I to collaborate together doesn't get any better than that.
That is great. I'm also figuring out Zoom at the moment. It's supposed to be changing back and forth. Well, we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Tell me about you. Before we get into the new book, let's just go back a little bit, a few minutes of how you started, what your background is, because it's really fascinating. I'll give a little hint to everybody here. Chuck has worked with like the most powerful, impressive, active people in the world. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that and then how that led into coaching and your first book and a little bit of background. Maybe when we start talking about Climb to the Top, we can get into how you and I met then. But first, just like, what's your view on life and how are you living it?
Yeah, well, first, let me open, Kenny, with given that open-ended question. I want to express to our listeners that I am the richest man in the world. There are many people that may have bank accounts that are 100 times bigger than me, but there are very few people who are wealthier than I am. And I say that because I am blessed that every day I get to go to work in the service of someone else's success. And I come at that from a perspective that I am very happy and fulfilled to feel that I have had a career that has led me to an unexpected place. And I say that for context because what I do is spend a whole lot of time helping people to get better at what they do. But I state that, and the reason I led with I am the wealthiest man on earth, because it is a privilege to do what I do in the service of other people. Because, Kenny, in my background for many years, I am a career Wall Streeter. I came to New York and to the world of finance, having grown up 50 miles outside of New York, that from the time I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to do was go to Wall Street. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what one needed to study to get there, but I'm just very fortunate that it had an appeal to me that I always leaned in on and that I ultimately came to join and then ultimately to climb. So now to bring everyone up to date, I have my own company. It's called Climb Leadership. I am an executive coach where I teach to many different companies two things. I teach them to speak publicly, just like we're doing right now. That's the outside and the external layer of any human being that needs to communicate. And the second thing that I teach is the inside of an individual, something called emotional intelligence, helping people to become more self-aware and how, using tools, to stay calm under the weight of great expectations. So that I teach not only at the executive level, but I am very proud to state that I am on the faculty of Columbia University, where I am on my 7th year teaching scientists and engineers how to communicate. Let me stop there, Kenny. How's that?
No, that's great. I love it. I love the whole notion of looking not just at how people express themselves, because I find not only just in the coaching world, but in the life world. Well, let's go back. In the life world, a lot of people never really think about how they're expressing themselves at all. They just plow into the world with whatever emotions are driving them. And very often their emotions drive their behaviors in a way that aren't intentional and that they're not even aware of, and that are doing more damage than they are good. And if you were to show them a videotape of themselves the next day, they'd be shocked to see how they actually show up, which leads to so many misunderstandings and debates and arguments between people who get under each other's skin, not through what they're actually saying, but how they're going about it. So just the awareness of how to present your body in the world is a huge thing. But then a lot of coaching, it only goes there. It's kind of what I call the fake it till you make it, or many people call the fake it till you make it approach, which is let's just take a breath and do this, which I think is like a Band-Aid if you're only looking at that side of it. If you're only dealing with anxiety and nervousness and sweaty palms or jitters or eyes down in the moment, then all you can ever do is address them in the moment. To actually go into the EQ side and work with what's going on inside somebody to address the internal mechanism, I think is where people begin to have mastery over their external mechanism. And instead of it just being fix the outside when you need to, it's readjust the whole person moving forward. Is that kind of how EQ and the speaking skills work together?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. But I think in my case, Ken, it was born out of my own ignorance. And I want to share a teaching, or at least a narrative that helped me lead to the conclusion that you formed. I spent many, many years in my Wall Street life, particularly for Mike Bloomberg, as their public spokesman. I was given a job that I'd never done before. I had a knack for stepping on the stage, but I never brought any science to it. I didn't know what I did. I didn't know how I did it. I just knew that somebody believed I had the potential to do it well. But when I started to teach it, Ken, and here's where it changed for me, I did not include, or nor did I have any notion that what I had learned about emotional intelligence was going to actually matter when I helped somebody to step on stage, whether it's the TED stage or whether it's in front of shareholders or even the simplicity of an internal meeting. Who knew? But there was one particular coaching assignment, Ken, early in my career where I wasn't getting through. This was a good guy that I was trying to help, but I felt stalled and ineffective as a coach. And I began to ask myself, what's going on here? I couldn't quite find a handle on why he was not improving. He wasn't really taking to the lessons that I was trying to get him to adapt. And what I found, Ken, what was happening was I didn't take the time to really recognize, nor was I socially or even self-aware of what was happening. And what I came on further examination of why it is I wasn't helping him is because he was scared to death. He didn't let it on. I didn't really know it. And I didn't even know how to look for how do I help him to face his fears and then to confront them. And I state that because I became a better teacher of these skills that we speak publicly only when I came to the burning and light bulb realization that until I can figure out what is happening inside this individual of which he was not revealing, I had to go on a hunt and figure out how do I take this thing that is burning inside, this enormous amount of fear. And his fear was something and I came to know he was rooted in perfectionist tendencies. So he let the enemy be or trying to be perfect was the enemy of the very good. And if he couldn't do something perfectly, he didn't do it at all. And that was new to me. I said, why don't you try? Well, unless I get it perfect, I'm too afraid of social judgment. I'm too afraid of making a mistake. And he said, in front of you. And my point is, I want you to make mistakes in front of me. That's the point. Because when you go out in the world to do what it is I'm training you to do, the stakes are too high. But he was so fearful, even when there was nothing at stake. And that's where, when I figured out, I had studied in graduate school this social science called emotional intelligence. But Ken, it wasn't until I came to the path of being ineffective that I had to figure out, how do I unlock the potential for getting someone to convey what they want from the outside by measuring their emotional intelligence and using that for three things that I use in my coaching practice: evidence, relevance, and consequence. We needed the evidence of how and why he is not facing his fears, the relevance of why it matters, and the consequence of either inaction, not doing anything, and or the potential consequence that if you improve your communication skills, you will significantly improve your value to your company and to your brand. So that's how it came to be.
I love that insight. There's two things about what you just said that really landed for me. One is this notion that people can want something and truly, really want something, like not, oh, maybe like, I really want this job, or I really want to get married and have children, or I really want to get in shape and lose weight and lower my cholesterol and my blood pressure, or I want to make more money, or I want to travel. People can really want something and be, because you said he's not aware of, be completely blind, completely like it's just outside the frame of a camera frame, just out here, just totally unaware of things inside of them that are actually moving them away from that thing that they want. And then you would go up to somebody and saying, well, why are you doing that? And they don't even know, they don't even see that initial awareness of a fear, a doubt, an anxiety, an apprehension, how I'm going to look to other people, fear of judgment, fear of criticism that everybody feels, that go on inside of us on such a subconscious level that they're working against our desires without our even being aware of it. And then because this goes to the second part of what you said, even when people become aware of it, there's then also that it's not even really a conscious decision-making process. It's kind of an emotional decision-making process that sounds something like, is the place I'm at, which is where I don't want to be, so uncomfortable that I'm willing to face the fears and pains of the things that I'm afraid of in order to get the thing that I want? Or is facing the fears and pains that I'm afraid of in order to get the thing that I want so massively frightening to me that I'm willing to stay in the pain that I'm already in? And people don't always put it into that equation, but I find that all human behavior really comes down to that. You're here and you want to be here, but this path is scary. Is here more scary, or is the path more scary? Because whichever is more scary, you're going to do the other.
Well, what you're stating, there's two observations here. One, what is the cost, and what is the consequence of inaction? And this is hard to do because how do you measure what didn't happen? Mm-hmm. So we try to get them to be reflective on the fact that what I can guarantee, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll get what you've always got. Yes. So think about the frame of the inaction. I don't know what the cost and the consequence is, but I am certain of what will happen if you choose to do nothing. But Ken, there's one other thing you're describing, and I think it's what I had to learn to become a better coach. And it's rooted in two B's: biases and blind spots. And in spite of whatever intellect, whatever education anybody has, one thing that is common to all human beings, we all, as a result or the sum of our experiences, we develop biases. That's neither good nor bad, but they have implications on how we perceive things and the decisions that we make. What I also know, because I train a lot of leaders who actually want me to help them identify the blind spots. Some people are very blind toward a particular person. They don't see the weakness. They're blind toward some other factor. Well, that's okay. We all have them, but often we're not aware of them. And they become important when it's time to make decisions, particularly big strategic decisions. What's the consequence if you make a decision being blind to a factor that may be important to the rest of the world and it's not important to you? So when you actually go into the world and you find out that the rest of the world values something that you don't, it can be a gut punch. So I state that because when I coach people, Ken, I give them an assessment called, let's just say, to keep it simple, where I measure their natural tendencies. Many people don't even know, as you were describing before, they're not even conscious about what it is they do. They just wake up and they do it. What I ask people to think is be strategic, intentional, and intentional about your acts. How do you show up? How do you decide? How do you even communicate the justification of your decision to people that expect that? Well, often they don't even know. So what I'm suggesting here is the biases and blind spots to all of us should be things that we should face. And when I measure the natural tendencies, I help them to recognize, here are your biases, here are your blind spots. Sometimes it's revelatory. Oh, I didn't know. Other times it's more, oh my God, I do that. I know I did that, but I never had anybody to challenge it. So I never really had the impetus to change it. So that's where what you're describing is really, as us, as you now, as coaches, even before we act in a way that layers on a skill set that we're actually hired to train them, I have found that I first have to go into some kind of first self-protective mode for that individual to recognize, before we figured out how we're going to run, let's determine the methods by which we walk. Mm-hmm. And then, and only when we feel confident that we have identified the things that make you tick, only then can we race or sprint to the top. Otherwise, we're just burning a lot of needless energy.
Can you imagine the world if high school taught this in addition to math and typing?
I think about it every day. In fact, often I think about, I was on my Columbia campus for the last 3 days, and I was teaching engineers public speaking, as you'd expect. And all I could think about, in fact, when some students asked me, wow, this is really cool, the stuff you're teaching us, no one ever taught us, and these are brilliant engineers. And I began to question, why do you think you never learn these? And what I was really describing was a huge gap between people's formal education and career expectations. And what happens in school, Ken, is they teach you to cram, exam, and regurgitate. And your success is based upon the amount of information you were able to regurgitate, where the educational model rewards what you get right and punishes you for what you get wrong. And we end up with the score. And to many of my students, that was their identity for life. Now,
That
that's
was
not you.
my identity
Of
for
course.
many
Who
years.
wouldn't? You weren't getting into Cal Berkeley until you had the right SAT score and the right GPA. But now what I think about, what does the world value on the career expectation mountain? It values creativity, collaboration, adaptability, emotional intelligence. Where's the GPA in that? Where is the cram, exam, regurgitate in a world that is expecting you, particularly as a screenwriter? You know that the people that you are writing that script for have been trained in the art of improvisation. They're about to go in to shoot a movie based on the lines they had to memorize, recognizing that the magic that's going to happen, in spite of the brilliant play or movie you might have written, you're going to improvise.
Yeah.
Who told them? Where is the memorization in that? Careers and lives are one gigantic act of improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what you do for a living, who you're married to, you can go in there with your script. It's wonderful. You got a plan. But the best laid plans of mice and men, we know what happened to them.
Yeah.
The plan may be a good one, but if it's not subject to the self-adjustment and to adapt to the world as it is, it's not going to be real effective. And that's why I teach what I do, helping people to stay calm under the weight of enormous pressure that they can't always predict or expect. And so we go in with a foundation, which is solid, recognizing that whatever that foundation is for how you're going to communicate, it's going to change along the way. And and wrap your arms around it, welcome it. But the people with perfectionist tendencies have a hard time to do it. So sometimes you just have to help them to unlock those tendencies.
Yeah, that wrap your arms around it, welcome it is one of the greatest pieces of advice I got when I started film directing from another film director, a guy named Billy Ray, who's really incredible, just an incredible human being and a great film director. He said, whenever a crew member or an actor or anybody comes up to you with a problem, even if it is a problem from an actor saying, I don't understand this line, to a crew member saying the makeup kit didn't show up, to the AD saying the actor's not here, whatever the problem is, your response should be, that's great. And most people go, what do you mean that's great? Like, you're on a set and you have a deadline, you have a schedule, and you have to do a certain number of pages a day. What do you mean it's great if the makeup kit didn't show up or an actor doesn't understand a line? He says it's exactly the same thing you just said. Making a movie is the magical transition from planning to creation. And if you're not willing to embrace that magical transition, then at best, all you can do is regurgitate. And you struck on a really neat thing in there, which is we go through school and we're taught that process, that, cram, regurgitate. And then you get into the working world. And I have a lot of clients who are middle-level managers who want to rise up through the ranks and become key executives and CEOs, but they're in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, early 40s, trying to build their careers. And they got into a particular field because they studied for it and trained for it and got good at something like engineering or whatever it is. And then they showed that they were good at that. And because they were good at that, they got promoted to now lead a team of other people doing that. When they first started the company, whatever company it is, the company will put a lot of time and energy and resources and money into training them how to do their skill for the company. And they're good at it, so they excel at it. And then they make them a manager of other people doing that and don't put any time, money, resources, or expense into training them how to lead other people. We're just expected to go from being really good at our skill to leading other people in doing that skill. And what you wind up with is leaders who don't have the skill to lead now not doing the thing that they used to be doing, and new people doing the thing that they're not doing anymore, not getting led in it. And then people go, why isn't it working after we promoted you? And the answer nobody ever comes up with is, because I have 20 years of training in coding but nobody ever trained me in leading coders. And this process right here, moving from the cram regurgitate of college to the embrace improvisation and learn new skills to create new outcomes, is I think it's the way that makes the world a better place. I really do.
Yeah, and what you're describing to many of us coaches, one of our coaches' coach is a guy named Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote some wonderful books, and one of them was called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." So just think about the power
Great
of the
title.
statement. And what he talks about in his book is called the paradox of success, recognizing that what you described, the majority of people getting promoted on the strength of their technical competence. But now they're promoted into a position where the job description has radically changed. And it's interesting to note that they earned their credibility, trust, and respect on the capacity to do that thing especially well until they transition into the job description of which they are unprepared and ill-equipped. But someone's got the confidence that, well, you're probably smart enough to figure it out. Well, to anybody's listening, let me just state very boldly, you may have the confidence to try to figure it out, but what I can guarantee over 9 years of doing this, you won't. You're going to try and you may fail. And I wish you the very best. I hope you don't. But where I spend most of my living, Ken, is in that space between when they get to that place and the ambitions or the aspirations they have to get further up the mountain. What now kicks in that job description is a radically different set of skills, which on the LinkedIn top 5 soft skills have nothing to do with technical competence or pedigree, and everything to do with persuasion, collaboration, communication, adaptability, emotional intelligence. Everything that we have been speaking about so far is now how to get out of that paradox of success. And once people recognize the power of the change in this job description and the consequence of not retooling for it, that's the big one. Because if you don't do anything and you're just expected to wing it, you're going to have a lot of people resigning in the company saying, I'm not quitting the company, I'm quitting you.
Mm-hmm. Which is a really interesting point when you think of who was the you to that person before that person was promoted. So if you've never had management training, if you've never worked with a coach, if you've never studied the skills of leadership in any way or been introduced to it, or the process of looking at what you're thinking and feeling on the inside and how that projects itself in expression of thoughts and actions on the outside and what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. If you've never been exposed to or studied or practiced that, your only example of leadership is the person who led you when you were doing the skill. Well, if when you were doing the skill, the person who led you was somebody who you didn't feel trust in, you didn't feel confidence for, you didn't feel was leading well, you didn't feel had your back, you didn't feel had these skills, when you now have that person's position, the only example of that job that you've ever had is the person who did it the opposite of the way that you think it should be done.
Right. They did the other thing.
But just like children who grow up complaining about their parents and then 30 years later wind up doing things exactly the same way their parents did because it's all you know. If all you know is this bad example and then you get into it saying, well, that example was horrible, you're going to wind up emulating that bad example unless you go learn new skills, which I think is a great transition to how you first wrote Climb to the Top and kind of moved from Bloomberg as a speaker to starting your own company and writing the book. What is Climb to the Top, and what do you talk about in the book, and how did that lead to us meeting?
Yeah, no, okay. There's a lot to go with here, and I'm glad. And thank you for the opportunity. It's a great ball you just served me. Well, let me first describe A Climb to the Top. It is a book that I wrote that was published in 2016. And even though when you hear those words, A Climb to the Top, it is not a book on mountaineering. But I use, and I wrote the book, mountaineering as a metaphor for how to climb a career. But instead of ice axes and crampons, which is what I was trained to climb a mountain, instead, what's on display in the book is something called the 10 Commandments of Great Communicators, which is the framework for communication tactics that I had learned over my many, many years of public speaking on Wall Street. And as I was blessed to be a born or selected into a career I never expected. I started to step on stage and I would get a lot of applause. And I'm grateful for that, but I wanted to understand if people were going to clap for me, what is it that I did that even earned or deserved, assuming the applause was authentic and I'll just accept it is, and they're not just clapping for the heck of it. But when people started to ask me, how do you do what you do? And at first, Ken, I didn't know. I don't know. I just get up there and I just start to speak. The only thing that I was ever conscious of early in my career is being enthusiastic, only because I think there's nothing soul crushing than sitting in an audience and seeing a speaker who has a great pedigree and is brilliant and is incredibly boring. You're tuned out in the first 15 seconds. So I don't care who it is. So when I thought about it, and a friend of mine sat in an audience, and I asked him, his name was Ed. Ed, what do I do? He said, I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit on your next speech with a pen and a paper, and I'm going to tell you. And so we came into my next speech, and at the end of the speech, he and I had lunch, and he had a piece of paper, and he wrote down all the things that I do. Here's, Chuck, is what you do. That became the 10 Commandments. And what did they include? There's 10 chapters in the book. Chapter 8 is called The Power of the Pause, just like I've done right now. It's recognizing that when we speak, we're very careful not to overwhelm or overload the quantity of information that we are conveying, and recognizing a simple tactic like that. You know, in the Hollywood world, you pause, or the comedians pause, for either dramatic effect or to recognize there's a punchline coming, and that awkward silence that people may perceive, why is he not speaking? Because it's a tactical display to help emphasize the next word. But the power of the pause is also, as a speaker, it gives me the opportunity when I'm pausing to think about what's going to be next. Where many people don't think about it, they insert the filler words and verbal crutches. So instead of pausing, they, so it's sort of like, kind of like, but not really. That's what they do. When I'm pausing, I am conscious of clearing the mind, not filling it. I don't need an outlet for all these wasted sounds to go anywhere because they're not in my head. What's in my head are clear word choices. So that's one chapter. And I'll give one other example because it's quite tangible. Chapter 6 in the book is called The Rule of Three. It's a Greek rhetorical technique these Greeks figured out thousands of years ago, and it hasn't changed, that we as human beings on the receiving end of information process information better in threes than in 4 or in 5. So if we think about, you eat Rice Krispies, it's snap, crackle, pop. When you are a little kid, your parents read to you the 3 little pigs, 3 blind mice, 3 musketeers. The genie granted you 3 wishes. And I listened to, as I grew up, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and Creedence Clearwater Revival. So this rule of 3 is everywhere, and that became another chapter. So Ken, I wrote the book by putting into a climb to the top the thesis that if you communicate well, based upon my experience, that people who rise to the top, many of them do so because they are compelling communicators. They may have been promoted on the strength of their technical competence, but they climbed to the top of the mountain on a foundation of communication and emotional intelligence. And I wanted to make my mission when I started my company that as the authority, the author, I actually could be the one who wrote the book so that it would help me with the credibility that when somebody hired me, I had an instant toolkit that was proprietary. Even though I borrowed the tactics from Martin Luther King and Barack Obama and all the great orators of the world, I made it mine. That's what a climb to the top is.
That I remember reading A Climb to the Top on an airplane. So let me take the next part of the story, if I may.
You bet.
So we're recording this in the end of August of 2023. In July of 2021, I was at a crisis moment in my life. It was the tail end of COVID, but we'd been locked in the house for a couple of years. During COVID, my wife gave birth to twins, and we had a 4-year-old. So we were sleepless for months and frayed and on edge, and my marriage was suffering. And the movie business right now in August of 2023, the Writers Guild, my union's been on strike for more than 100 days. And back then, all the reasons we're on strike now is because all of this stuff was happening then. And I was looking at the writing on the wall as I turned 50 that the chances of the career of screenwriting and film directing that had provided for me and my life and my family for 25 years was not going to do the same for me from ages 50 to 75 as it did from ages 25 to 50. So I needed to make a career change, and I was having a family change happening, whether I wanted it or needed it or not. And I had a background in coaching and speaking, and met another coach who we both know, Orly Amore, to learn how to be a public speaker. And when I was talking to Orly about her possibly coaching me to become a public speaker, she gave me a list of referrals of people who had worked with her, and your name was on that list. And I called you, and I had 7 of those calls, and instead of the 5 minutes of, yeah, Orly's great, okay, nice to meet you, I think you and I spoke for an hour and just had a synergistic soul level connection, which I hope everybody feels on this call. And in that call, you said, this is Climb to the Top, and we're doing a television pilot for it. And the television pilot is all about people in crisis moments of their lives and how they transition those, and using the metaphor of a mountain climb to face the challenge. Would you like to apply? So I did. And right around this time, 2 years ago in August, you called me back and said, you're on the show. So it was probably just a week later, the beginning of September, that I was on a plane flying to New York, my first plane since COVID began. So I hadn't been out of California or Los Angeles in a couple of years. My first time away from my family for a couple of years. My first time in front of the camera ever, after all my years of being behind the camera. And I read your book on the plane on the way there, because I wanted to get to you and know what you were all about. And all of the things you just said have stuck with me the whole time. And that experience of going to New York and climbing that mountain, and the interviews that we did, the side interviews, and the moments of breakdown and new clarity and new possibility really have led to everything I've done over the last couple of years of building a business, and even us here on this podcast together. So again, my enormous gratitude. But that story of improvisation and embracing the unknown certainly defined my taking a whole new direction in life, which later that didn't lead to. Later, you wrote another book, which brought us back together again. So, and that book, I'll just tease a little bit, focused on those moments of crisis in your life that can reshape an entire lifetime, and the impact that they can have on everybody in your world. So tell me about the moment that changes your life.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing, Ken, and thank you. I appreciate that. And for context to our listeners, A Climb to the Top is a television pilot that our agents have worked diligently to try to sell to Hollywood to convert it into a series, hopefully with a network or a streamer. We started taking it out. We have pitched it in many places. We got, I like it, I don't know. And, the typical sales cycle. And then everybody went on strike, and that hasn't helped. However, if you are interested in seeing the sizzle reel, it is available on my website. And if you go to chuckgarcia.com and you click the A Climb to the Top tab, you will see an entry for television show, and you get to see Ken Goldie and me and some of the other cast members climbing a mountain in the Adirondacks to describe what Kenny just articulated, which led me to write another book. This is the emotional companion to A Climb to the Top. And it was born out of the description of Kenny's own, I don't know if it's the right choice of words here, but from tragedy to triumph, or maybe from adversity to victory, call it whatever you may. What I found, Ken, through the course of my life, both as a mountaineer, as a career coach, as a husband and a father, when you ask people about their lives, often the answer that you get could be, and it often is, born from a moment that somebody had in their life that caused them to self-reflect, change careers, maybe marry, unmarry, whatever the case is. Actions and decisions that are drawn not from a series of events, but from potentially a learning outcome, a moment that the unexpected occurred that caused the mind and the heart to shift and to take your life or your career in a different place. Hence, the title of the book is The Moment That Defines Your Life. But the book, when I thought about how can I write this about people and their stories of tragedy to triumph, I did it the same way I wrote A Climb to the Top. How do I teach the subject of emotional intelligence? And my only concern when I teach something is that it's accessible enough to convert it into action. Because the things that I learned in my formal educational model, particularly the theories that my professors espoused that I had to regurgitate onto a test, had very little connection to me and were utterly impractical. So what's the point? What I teach is emotional intelligence. The philosophy that I live by, if I can say I actually have one, is rooted on the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, his book called Meditations, which is the philosophy of Stoicism. How do you treat the tragic moments dispassionately so that you can clear your mind rather than being hijacked in the emotion, oh my God, I'm falling off a cliff? How do you best respond to the event so that you can turn that negative event into something positive? Hence, the idea of the book was born. And what I write about in the book are tools, tactics, and techniques that should you be in a moment that causes you to reflect that perhaps a decision to change something in your life is warranted or even provoked in your mind that something different should happen. This is a toolkit for you. And I wrote it, Ken, because I felt that in my own life and many of my people in my life, we're not trained to do something in those moments. We twist and flail endlessly, and then we just hope for the best. I think hoping for the best is a very low bar because it's passive and you're letting the world take you to a place that is unexpected, but you had very little input. Don't let the world take you to that place. Instead, and everybody has these moments, how do you carry a toolkit to be ready for the unexpected when something tragic hits? This is a toolkit for either emotional intelligence to help you to become more self or socially aware, or the philosophy, rather than what the rest of the world is going to try to do, is to fill your mind and give you all this knowledge and say that you're smarter. It's counterintuitive. I say it's the opposite. What my book tries to do is not to fill your mind. Everyone else does that, but it's to clear your mind, to open it, and potentially, if I'm doing my job right, to change it. So the frame, the moment that defines your life, integrating the social science of emotional intelligence with the philosophy of Stoicism. And if you find yourself that you are either have had a moment, or what I can predict to our listeners, you will have a moment. I don't know when, I don't know where, and I don't know who's going to be in that moment, but you're going to have one. So prepare for the unexpected and open up your arms to the fact that you have no control over it until it happens. If you don't do anything different, it controls you. If you adopt a method, in my case, combining social science of EQ with Stoicism, now you get to control the moment and, if all goes well, make a decision to act and go out and be the thing that you always thought you could be.
I love it. I love it. The thing that I love about that whole concept most is not just that one should be looking for and aware of, and have the already prepared capability to see that huge defining moment that might come to your life and actually make you take either an emotional personal transition in who you're being in the world, or a very physical tangible transition in what you're doing in the world, or both. That it may start with that massive moment, like me getting on that plane to go to New York and coming back both divorced and changing careers. Like, you can have those massive moments, but that when you develop the toolkit of being able to see moments, you actually become skilled at making every moment of your life a moment that can define your life. And when I teach rooms of CEOs about physical leadership presence, I talk about not just standing on stage or walking into, your family Christmas party, or that big moment where everybody says, oh yeah, now you need to control yourself. I talk about walking from your office to the coffee break room. I talk about getting out of your car to go to your front door and into your kitchen to have dinner with your family. I talk about the moment when you wake up next to your significant other. Who are you being? I actually had a client recently. My relationship's great. I'm sure it is. They've been married like 40 years. But as he starts thinking about it, he's like, my wife wakes up a little earlier than I do. And usually when she gets up and gets out of bed, I'm still asleep. And then when I get up, I'm groggy. And we kind of spend the morning not really relating to each other. And then she goes to work and I go to work. And then we come home and she's tired and I'm tired. And I go to bed. She goes to bed earlier and I go to bed later. And now that I think of it, we've been married 40 years and I love my wife and we have an awesome relationship. But we're really not making the most of every moment that we have together. So the notion that you can look for that big moment and develop the skills of being able to go with it when it comes, but when you do that, also develop the skills to look at every moment of your life and fill it with more meaning and more connection and more proactivity and more intent. When you multiply a lifetime of moment by moment by moment, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and all of those moments are lived with the intent of making the most powerful, most purposeful moment you can, instead of a lifetime of ignoring the value of a moment or reacting to what's coming at you in ways that your energy wouldn't have you do. That's the difference between an extraordinary life that a person looks back on with fulfillment and gratitude and satisfaction and closes their final eyes knowing they left everything on the field, as Teddy Roosevelt would have said, or fearing the end because you never really felt fulfilled in the journey. So I really recommend, and in a moment I'm going to give you a chance to tell people where the book is, but I really recommend people pick it up because it's not just about the defining moment of your life. It's about making every moment of your life one that you can define. And that's the thing that really touched me about the book. And I think what I tried to express in the foreword that I was so grateful that you asked me to write.
Well, I couldn't think of anyone else other than you. I wanted to write it for a couple reasons. One, you and I came into each other's lives inexplicably. Who knows? You were making a reference call and I had a better idea because I sensed there's something more here. Who knew that moment would lead us to that? And now we're great friends, collaborating with each other and supporting each other's projects. But here's the difference, Ken, in what it is you're describing. And I'll use a rhetorical technique here. Active and passive. You could spend the rest of your life waiting for those moments to happen, and some moment will occur. But to your point, and that's passive, and there's nothing wrong with that because then you can't control everything. But what you're describing, Ken, is the active. I don't need to wait around and wait for that moment to happen. I can make that moment happen because you are the author of your life and you get to decide when to turn any one of those, even in that couple, because I'm that couple, in that couple where you have a cup of coffee, you can decide in that moment to take that relationship to another place. Or you could wait around and wait for nothing to happen and tomorrow's another day. Don't wait for the moment to come to you. You be the one to make that moment and bring it to someone else in the service of the marriage, in the service of your career. In fact, I want to say to our listeners, everybody start holding yourself accountable to bring the moment to the people in your life that actually matter. Don't wait for them or make excuses. Oh, I was waiting for you to say you love me. The heck with that. Buy them a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, and tell them how much you mean to them. There's a moment that you've delivered the unexpected, and it came from the heart. But you finally found the courage to say, I'm not going to wait for it. I make it. You don't wait for magic to happen. You learn abracadabra how to make it. And before you know it, people say you're making magic. But that's the point. We make magic. We don't wait for the magic to come to us.
Everybody listening, if you cannot feel the passion and the power that Chuck Garcia has for you making every moment of your life better, rewind this podcast and listen to it from the beginning, because I think it's impossible to sit with Chuck for more than a minute. I know I felt all of this in our first phone call together and not come away truly believing that you have the power to make your life what you want of it. I have a saying in all of my books that you have the power to be the person you want to be, have the things you want to have, and do the things you want to do with the people you want to do them with. And the difference between all of that and not is just standing up to say, I'm going to, as Chuck said, I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to take responsibility for doing that, even if it risks pain and fear and embarrassment and failure, because there will be failure. So many people think I'm going to go do it and I'm going to get the perfect response exactly when I want it. No, if you've been in a difficult marriage for a long time, or a difficult work relationship for a long time, or siblings or parents, or even your relationship with your own self, change comes with challenge. And the commitment is to work through the challenge, to make the benefit of where you want to be more important to you than the pain of the journey to get there. And when you can commit to that life, and I think that's the heart of Stoicism, that being who you want to be and doing the things you need to do to get there are more valuable and more important and worth the sacrifices and the challenges that you have to go through in order to accomplish that. And unfortunately, in our modern Western world anyway, that's not what we're taught. We're taught satisfy needs and desires of the moment, not sacrifice wants and desires of the moment in order to accomplish what you want in the future. And I'm rereading Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People right now. A great starting point for this work if anybody wants one and hasn't read it. And he says, just compare your life to a farmer. A farmer cannot plant seeds in the fall. You'll have nothing to harvest. You can't ignore the springtime and plant in August and harvest in September. You have to till your fields and prepare your fields at the winter thaw and plant in the spring in order to get the reap of the harvest in the fall. And if you only go after that farmer just sought personal pleasure all through the sunny days of enjoying sunshine and playing, come fall there'd be no harvest to reap. And humanity is the same way. If you want the life that you want, you have to be willing to go through the challenge and the struggle and the discipline of doing the things that are uncomfortable and are painful in order to get to the other side and accomplish what you want from your life. So
yeah, and Ken, I put that, and I'm a fan of Covey, but one of the 7 habits, and I want to take your narrative and relate it to something very simple and accessible before I tell you how to get the book. One of the habits of Covey is seek first to understand, pause for dramatic effect, then to be understood. Mm-hmm. When I wrote A Climb to the Top, and when I wrote The Moment That Defines Your Life, I was very conscious of that principle. And I state that because many of the people that have come into my life, whether I'm hired to help them or they just come into my life the way you did or anyone else, I think about what many people do. They talk a lot over each other. They have an opinion. They are opinionated. They are aggressive, especially in my Wall Street world. And by golly, they're going to tell you. And they talk. And they look at communication as, I'm a very good speaker. But ask yourself, are you a good listener? That we have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason, to multiply by a factor of 2 to listen twice. But people don't. Because you'll never get my opinion if I listen to you. So by golly, I'm going to tell you. But I state that because I think what you're describing in your Covey in that farm episode is how we live it every day. If you want what you want, you're probably going to be more effective listening your way to success because you don't learn anything when you speak. And you learn a lot when you shut your mouth and you listen to it. So to get the moment that defines your life, it will be available on February 6th. Our publisher is Post Hill Press, and it is being distributed by Simon & Schuster. But it is available today, right now, for pre-order on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and ThriftBooks.com. If you buy your books on Amazon, and you go to Amazon in the search bar, you type in Chuck Garcia, or A Climb to the Top, or The Moment That Defines Your Life, you will see my books. And you will see The Moment That Defines Your Life, and it is available in hardcover. And you will see the date is February 6th is the date they will ship it. And if you order it, thank you very much for that consideration. And if you read it, there's just one design flaw in a book. You have to read it. And if you do, I'll give you my contact information. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, you don't get that offer from most authors to say, write to me and open up a dialogue about the work. So I think the dialogue that you and I opened up has been profoundly impactful in my life. Knowing Chuck so well and his work, I recommend that everybody go get your pre-order of The Moment That Defines Your Life now and sit by your mailbox for the next 6 months until it comes. Because I think reading it might just be the moment that allows you to find that moment. And Chuck, I can't wait to get out to New York and see you again. We're due for another hug and another meal.
No question. Well, in fact, Kenny, first, let me thank you for many things, but the least of which is writing the introduction to The Moment That Defines Your Life. When I read your words, it was incredibly touching, but it was the perfect, in my case, the preamble to what people read before they even read my words. They read yours. You start the book. And it is so grateful and fulfilling to have you lead the way on this trail and then hand me the baton. If I've done my job well, people are going to feel, wow, that's a pretty good book. But they're starting with Ken Gold, not Chuck Garcia. So for me to be able to give you the baton and for you to hand it back to me, that's what collaboration and love is. And you don't get any better than that. So thank you. And to our listeners, if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on my website. All you have to do is remember my name, Chuck Garcia, and add a .com to it. And in there, you will find a heap of information, including my contact information. Feel free to touch base with me, but I do mean that from the bottom of my heart. If you got something to say about the moment, say it. I'd like to hear it, no matter good, bad, or indifferent. Your honesty and candor is appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, everybody, for listening to our first Fastway podcast. We're both so grateful for you to be here. We appreciate your time, your attention. Check us out on the website, TikTok, Instagram, every place. Inspire yourself, inspire others. Go have a great day. Chuck, I love you. Thanks so much.
Love you too, Ken. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening today. Chuck and I really appreciate it. Podcast number 1 for the Fast Way. If you'd like to learn more about the Fast Way, the book, and our courses, please go to breakthroughleadershiptraining.com/thefastway. We look forward to seeing you there.